On February 5, 2012, Josh Powell took the lives of his two young sons, Charlie, who was just 7 years old, and Braden, who was only 5. In a tragic and twisted turn of events, he murdered them before ending his own life in a planned explosion. He attacked them with a hatchet and then set their house on fire, with a social worker listening on the phone, helpless as the boys screamed for their lives. But the horrors of that day didn't begin in 2012. They started 3 years earlier, in December of 2009, when Josh's wife, Susan Powell, vanished without a trace in the middle of the night. The disappearance of Susan would become a mystery that gripped the nation. Josh Powell was the only suspect, but he was never charged, never arrested. For 2 long years, he walked free while investigators tirelessly searched for Susan's body, trying to uncover the truth of her fate. As the years passed, Josh's world began to unravel. When he realized he was about to lose custody of his sons, the 2 little boys Susan had loved more than anything, Josh made a horrific choice. Rather than allow Susan's family to raise the boys, he decided to take their lives. In his twisted mind, he chose murder over the thought of his sons being loved and cared for by anyone else. This is the story of Susan Powell, a loving mother trapped in an abusive marriage who saw the evil lurking around her and desperately tried to escape it. Her story is one of love, loss, and a tragic attempt to protect her children from a man who was determined to destroy them all. To truly understand the story of Susan Powell, we must first see her not as just a victim or a missing person, but as a woman who fought fiercely to protect her children until the very end. Susan Cox was born in 1981 in New Mexico to a close-knit and loving family. Her parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, instilled in her strong values: faith, family, and integrity. Growing up, Susan was known for being remarkable. She was kind, intelligent, and artistic. Music was a huge part of her life, and she played multiple instruments. Wherever she went, she lit up the room with her vibrant presence. Devoutly religious, Susan was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and her faith was central to her identity. It was in church that she met Josh Powell. On the surface, Josh seemed like a good match. He came from a religious family, had a job, and presented himself well. But Susan's parents had reservations about him. He was older, controlling, and socially awkward. Still, Susan saw something good in him and chose to give him a chance. They began dating in the early 2000s, and by April 2001, they were married. Susan was hopeful. She believed she could build a happy life with Josh and that love could overcome his flaws. But almost immediately, cracks began to appear. Josh was terrible with money. He made poor financial decisions, spent recklessly, and refused to listen to Susan's concerns. They accumulated massive debt, and Josh couldn't hold a job, getting fired for poor performance or conflicts with supervisors, always blaming everyone else but himself. As the years passed, Susan began to document everything. She kept detailed journals writing about her fears, her hopes, and the growing tension in her marriage. One of her journal entries revealed just how much she was suffering. Josh frightens me sometimes. The way he looks at me when he's angry, the way he talks about control. I pray he'll change. In 2005, Susan gave birth to their first son, Charlie. She was overjoyed. She was born to be a mother. But motherhood only made her feel more trapped, more dependent on Josh financially, and less able to leave. 2 years later, Braden was born. Susan now had 2 beautiful sons she loved desperately, but they also became her reason to stay in a marriage she knew was growing more dangerous by the day. She feared what Josh might do if she left. As Josh's behavior worsened, becoming more emotionally abusive, controlling and monitoring Susan constantly, she grew increasingly afraid. So afraid, in fact, that she took an extraordinary step. Susan opened a secret safe deposit box and placed in it crucial documents, letters, and evidence. Among them was a haunting handwritten note. It read, "If I die, it may not be an accident. Even if it looks like one, check into Josh's involvement. He is capable of anything." This note was written in 2008, just 1 year before Susan vanished without a trace. Susan knew she was in danger, but she stayed for her boys. She understood that if she left and tried to take them with her, Josh would fight for custody. In family court, Manipulative people like Josh often won, and Susan feared for her children's safety. She confided in her parents, telling them she was scared. They begged her to leave, but Susan said she would. She just needed the right moment and the right plan. By late 2009, Susan was making preparations to leave. She contacted divorce attorneys, documented Josh's abusive behavior, and quietly prepared to escape. But Josh knew what was happening. He could feel her pulling away, and he was determined not to let that happen. The last photograph of Susan with her sons was taken on Thanksgiving 2009. 2 weeks later, she would be gone. On December 6, 2009, the Powell family was at home. It was a quiet Sunday. Susan Powell had spent the morning at church, as she always did. Her friends saw her there. She seemed normal, maybe a little tired, but otherwise she appeared fine, just like any other day. That evening, Josh Powell claimed that nothing unusual happened. They had dinner, put the boys to bed, and Susan went to sleep. But as the night wore on, Josh's story would take a bizarre turn. According to Josh, around midnight, he suddenly decided to take his two young sons, Charlie, age 4, and Braden, age 2, camping in December in Utah in the middle of a snowstorm. The temperature outside was 18 degrees Celsius, and snow was falling heavily. Any reasonable person would have stayed inside, but not Josh. He packed up his sleeping sons, drove them out to the West Desert, a remote, desolate area, and set up camp. For hours, they stayed out in the freezing cold, in the middle of the night, with 2 toddlers. The next afternoon, around 5 p.m., Josh claimed they returned home. But when they arrived, Susan was gone. Her purse and her cell phone were missing, but her car was still in the driveway. Josh said he tried calling her, but there was no answer. He checked the house, but she wasn't there. But despite the strange and worrying circumstances, Josh did not immediately call the police. He waited, letting hours pass. It wasn't until 11 p.m., nearly 24 hours after he claimed Susan had vanished, that he finally reported her missing. The West Valley City Police arrived right away. Within moments, they realized something wasn't right. Josh's story didn't make sense. Why would Susan leave without her car? Where could she have gone? Why hadn't Josh called the police sooner? As they spoke with Josh, they noticed something off about him. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't emotional. He was calm, even cold, almost annoyed by their questions. His demeanor raised immediate red flags for the detectives. When police began to search the house, they found disturbing evidence. There was a large wet spot on the carpet in the family room, freshly cleaned. Josh claimed it was spilled juice that he had cleaned up. But when the police tested it with luminol, they discovered it wasn't juice. It was blood. Susan's blood. 2 fans had been set up in the room, blowing air at the spot, trying to dry it. The vacuum cleaner showed signs of recent, extensive use, and the garbage disposal had been run repeatedly. In addition to Susan's purse and phone being gone, multiple cleaning supplies and a comforter from their bed were also missing. As the investigation continued, police impounded Josh's minivan. What they found inside was damning. Susan's blood was found in the back of the van. Not a lot, but enough. And the van had been recently thoroughly cleaned. An empty gas can was also discovered, with traces of accelerant inside. Josh had no explanation for this. The timeline Josh provided didn't add up. He claimed to have been camping all night, but investigators found that no tracks were left in the freshly fallen snow at the camping area. No evidence that anyone had been there. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed Josh's van in the area, but it was miles away from where he claimed to have been. And he was alone. There were no children in the vehicle. Police then interviewed the boys. Charlie, the older of the 2, made a chilling statement that sent a shiver down investigators' spines. He said, "Mommy was in the trunk. Mommy and Daddy got out, but Mommy didn't come back." When confronted with this, Josh dismissed Charlie's words, claiming the boy was confused and making things up. After all, Charlie was only 4, and his memory couldn't be trusted. Susan had been scheduled to work that Monday morning, but she never showed up. She never called. This was completely unlike her. Friends and family were deeply worried. They knew Susan would never just leave her children. She lived for them, and they were everything to her. Susan's purse and phone were never found. In 2009, before Find My iPhone existed, losing a phone meant losing all contact. And without it, Susan was unreachable. Within days, massive search efforts began. The West Desert, where Josh claimed to have been, was searched thoroughly, along with the areas surrounding their home. Landfills, mine shafts, and abandoned buildings were combed through. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search, with search dogs, helicopters, and divers scouring reservoirs and caves. For weeks, then months, they searched. But there was no sign of Susan. She had vanished. Throughout it all, Josh showed no emotion, no fear for his wife, no desperate pleas for her return. He remained cold and indifferent, his behavior revealing a disturbing lack of concern as investigators continued their search. Josh Powell became the sole focus of the investigation, but proving he killed Susan without a body is incredibly difficult. In criminal law, there's a saying, no body, no crime. It's not impossible to prosecute murder without remains, but it's extremely difficult. Prosecutors had circumstantial evidence, the blood, the suspicious behavior, the impossible alibi. But was it enough? Police seized Josh's computers, and what they found revealed a darkness no one had fully understood. Josh had been researching how to hide bodies, how to destroy evidence. Search terms like how long before a body decomposes and how to get away with murder. These searches had been made in the days before Susan disappeared, but there was more, much more. Investigators found thousands of images Josh had taken of Susan, secretly, without her knowledge. He'd hidden cameras throughout the house, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, filming Susan without her consent. For years, they found Susan's journals, the ones where she documented Josh's abuse, his control, her fear. Susan's voice echoed through the journal entry. I think Josh would rather kill me than divorce me. He's obsessed with control. I'm afraid of what he might do. Susan had seen this coming. She'd known. And then investigators discovered something that explained a lot about Josh. They looked into his father, Stephen Powell. Stephen Powell lived in Washington State. Police obtained a warrant to search his home. What they found was disturbing beyond words. Tens of thousands of images of Susan. Stephen Powell was obsessed with his daughter-in-law. He'd taken photos of her without permission, zoomed in on her body, kept them in organized files. Stephen kept diaries where he described sexual fantasies about Susan. He called her beautiful and perfect. He wrote about wanting to be with her. Susan had known about Stephen's obsession. She'd told friends she was uncomfortable around him, that he stared at her, made inappropriate comments. Josh had been raised by this man, a man who objectified women, who saw people as possessions, who taught his son that women were objects to be controlled. In 2011, Stephen Powell was arrested. Not for Susan's murder. They couldn't prove his involvement, but for voyeurism and possession of child pornography found during the search. He was convicted, sentenced to prison, but he never stopped defending Josh, never admitted knowing anything about Susan. While all this was unfolding, a custody battle had begun. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, were fighting for custody of Charlie and Braden. They couldn't stand the thought of the boys being raised by the man who'd murdered their daughter. The boys had been living with Josh since Susan's disappearance, but they were showing signs of trauma, behavioral issues, nightmares. In 2010, Josh moved the boys to Washington State to live with his father, Stephen, the man obsessed with Susan. This horrified the Cox family. Court-ordered psychologists evaluated the situation. Their reports were damning. Josh was emotionally abusive. The boys were being harmed. They recommended removing the children from Josh's custody. The custody battle intensified. Chuck and Judy Cox were making progress. The court was leaning toward giving them custody. By early 2012, Josh was losing. The evidence against him was mounting. His father was in prison. The courts were about to take his sons away. Friends said Josh's behavior became increasingly strange. He was giving away possessions, sending cryptic emails, making statements that suggested he was preparing for something. He sent a text to his family. I'm sorry, I can't go on. I love you all. It was dismissed as Josh being dramatic. On February 5th, 2012, a supervised visitation was scheduled. Josh was to see his sons at his home, but a social worker would be present. It was a step toward removing them permanently. The social worker, Elizabeth Griffin Hall, arrived with Charlie and Braden. The boys ran excitedly toward their father. They still loved him, despite everything. Josh opened the door. The boys ran inside, and before Elizabeth could follow, Josh slammed the door in her face, locked it. She immediately called 911. She knew something was wrong. She could smell gasoline. Inside, Josh Powell attacked his sons with a hatchet. Then he ignited gasoline he'd spread throughout the house. The house exploded. Charlie and Braden died from smoke inhalation and their injuries. Josh died in the fire he set. Police and firefighters arrived minutes later. Too late. The house was an inferno. There was nothing they could do. The next day, the world learned what Josh Powell had done. And the horror was almost incomprehensible. He'd murdered his own children, 7-year-old Charlie, 5-year-old Braden, the boys Susan had loved more than her own life. Chuck and Judy Cox lost their daughter to Josh, and then they lost their grandsons. Judy Cox said, "That monster made sure we'd never have closure." Investigators pieced together what Josh had planned. He'd been stockpiling gasoline for days. He'd written goodbye emails, timed to send after he was dead. In one email he wrote, "I'm sorry to everyone I've hurt. I can't live without my sons. This is the only way." But psychologists say this wasn't about loving his sons. This was about control, about making sure Susan's family couldn't have them, about inflicting maximum pain. He'd attacked them with a hatchet first. The medical examiner said both boys had defensive wounds. They'd tried to fight. They knew what their father was doing. Charlie was 7, old enough to understand, old enough to know his father was going to kill him. Can you imagine the terror? The funeral was held in Washington. Hundreds attended. The Cox family buried their grandsons next to empty plots, reserved for Susan when she's finally found. Josh's death didn't end the investigation into Susan's disappearance. If anything, it intensified it. Police publicly stated Josh Powell killed Susan. They were certain, but certain isn't the same as proven. The searches for Susan's body continued. With Josh dead, there was hope he might have told someone where he'd put her. Investigators pressed Stephen Powell. Surely Josh had told his father something, but Stephen refused to cooperate. Stephen claimed Josh was innocent, that Susan had run away, that everyone was framing his son. He maintained this even after Josh murdered his own grandchildren. Police returned to the West Desert, to abandoned mines, to desolate areas where a body could disappear for decades. The area where Josh claimed to have been camping that night covers thousands of square miles. Abandoned mines, caves, canyons. You could search for years and not cover it all. Cadaver dogs were brought in, ground-penetrating radar, drones with thermal imaging, every technological advantage available. Nothing. No trace of Susan Powell. Some investigators believe Josh burned Susan's body. That empty gas can in his van, the accelerant traces, perhaps he cremated her remains somewhere remote. Others believe she's in an abandoned mine shaft. Utah has hundreds of them. Deep, dangerous, perfect for hiding remains. Or she could be anywhere, buried in the desert, submerged in a reservoir, hidden in a landfill. Josh had 19 hours alone that night. He could have gone anywhere. Police tried to track Josh's movements that night through cell towers and surveillance cameras. But there are gaps, hours where he's unaccounted for. After Josh's death, investigators went through every computer, every hard drive, every device he'd ever owned. They recovered deleted files, searched for any hint of where Susan might be. Some files were encrypted. It took months to crack them. When they did, they found more disturbing images of Susan, more evidence of obsession, but no confession, no map, no location. In 2018, Stephen Powell died. He took whatever he knew to his grave. Some wonder if Josh had help, if someone else was involved. But no evidence of an accomplice has ever been found. Through it all, Chuck and Judy Cox have never stopped searching. They established a foundation in Susan's name. They've funded additional searches. They've kept her story in the public eye. They've put up billboards in Utah and Washington, offering rewards, pleading for information. Judy has said, "Someone knows something. Please help us bring Susan home." The case has inspired legislation. In Washington state, they passed the Susan Powell Act. It mandates that supervised visitations must occur at secure facilities, not private homes. Elizabeth Griffin Hall advocated for it. Several states have changed how they handle custody cases where one parent is suspected of harming the other. Susan's death and her son's deaths have saved other children. Susan's case remains open. West Valley City Police still have detectives assigned. They still receive tips. They still search when leads warrant it. As technology advances, there's always hope. DNA analysis improves. Geographic profiling gets more sophisticated. Maybe someday something will break. Susan Powell has been missing for 15 years. Her sons have been dead for 12. But Susan is more than a missing person, more than a cold case. She's a warning. Susan saw the warning signs. She knew Josh was dangerous. She documented everything. She prepared to leave. And still, she couldn't escape. She literally wrote that, if she died, to investigate Josh. She knew, and it wasn't enough to save her. How many other women are in Susan's position right now? Trapped, afraid, documenting their fears in secret, praying they'll get out before it's too late. Josh showed every warning sign. He controlled Susan's money, monitored her constantly, isolated her from friends, filmed her without consent, refused to let her have independence. And tragically, the system failed Susan, failed her sons. Josh was never charged, never arrested. He walked free for 2 years while investigators gathered evidence. Even when it was obvious Josh was dangerous, he kept custody of those boys. The court system moved slowly, too slowly. Charlie and Braden paid the price. The Cox family's tragedy is unimaginable. They lost Susan, then they lost their chance to save her sons. Chuck Cox has said, if someone you love is afraid of their partner, believe them, help them, don't wait. Susan was an artist, a musician. She played the harp beautifully. She wrote songs. She created beauty. She was loved. Her friends describe her as the kind of person who made everyone feel valued, who listened, who cared. But more than anything, Susan was a mother. Those boys were her entire world. She fought to protect them. And when Josh realized he was losing control, he made sure she would never see them again. Somewhere in Utah, Susan Powell's remains are waiting to be found. In a mine shaft, buried in the desert, hidden in a place only Josh knew. The search continues. Technology improves. Hope remains. Susan would be 43 years old now. Charlie would be 19. Braden would be 17. They should be here. Susan should have watched her boys grow up, graduate, fall in love, build lives. Instead, Josh Powell's legacy is evil, murder, the destruction of an entire family because he couldn't stand to lose control. But we choose to remember Susan, not as a victim, as a fighter, as a woman who saw evil and tried to escape it, as a mother who loved her children more than her own life. Find Susan, bring her home. That's what her family asks. That's what justice demands. And maybe someday, someone will. The Susan Powell case remains open. If you have any information about her disappearance, please contact West Valley City Police Department. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. You're not alone. This is the Silent Files. Some cases are about mystery. Some are about evil. Susan Powell's case is both. Subscribe for new episodes every 2 days. If this story moved you, if you believe Susan deserves to be found, share it. Sometimes awareness leads to answers. Until next time, remember Susan Powell. Remember what she fought for, and remember